Join me as I dive into the mysterious world of ancient witch trials to find out if they were just myths or if there's some real truth hidden in history. Witch trials are one of the most infamous episodes in human history, shrouded in mystery and controversy. For centuries, people have been debating whether they actually happened or if they're just a product of our collective imagination. But what's the truth behind these dark tales of magic and mayhem? Many people think they know what witch trials were all about, but the reality is that there are a lot of misconceptions surrounding this topic. For one, people often assume that witch trials were all about witch hunts, where evil villagers would go around accusing people of casting spells and whatnot. But the truth is that witch trials were often a symptom of deeper societal fears and anxieties. In many cases, witch trials were a way for people to cope with the unknown, to make sense of things that they couldn't explain. It's no coincidence that witch trials often coincided with times of great social and economic upheaval. When people are scared, they look for scapegoats. And during the Middle Ages, witches were the ultimate scapegoat. Another common misconception is that witch trials were all about women. While it's true that a disproportionate number of women were accused of witchcraft, the reality is that men were also accused, and many of them were executed alongside their female counterparts. Throughout history, witch trials have taken many forms, from the Spanish Inquisition to the Salem witch trials in colonial America. In many cases, these trials were fueled by political and religious ideologies, rather than any genuine fear of witchcraft. Witch trials weren't unique to Europe either. In many African and Asian cultures, witchcraft was a reality, and people who were accused of it were often subjected to brutal punishment. In some cases, witch trials were even used as a form of social control, where people who deviated from the norm were labeled as witches and punished accordingly. From the witch hunts of medieval Europe to the witch trials of colonial America, there's no shortage of evidence that witch trials were a real phenomenon that occurred across different cultures and regions. Whether it was the confessions of alleged witches or the eyewitness accounts of people who claim to have seen witchcraft firsthand, the historical record is rich with accounts of witch trials. One of the most shocking things I discovered during my research is the sheer scale of the witch trial phenomenon. In some regions, thousands of people were accused of witchcraft, and many of them were executed in gruesome ways. In other cases, people were subjected to forced confessions, torture, and other forms of psychological manipulation. The role of hysteria in witch trials is also a fascinating topic. In many cases, people were accused of witchcraft based on nothing more than rumor or hearsay. And before long, entire communities were whipped up into a frenzy of fear and paranoia. It's a sobering reminder of how easily fear and misinformation can spread. But perhaps the most shocking truth of all is that many people who were accused of witchcraft were entirely innocent. They were often the victims of circumstance, accused of witchcraft because they were outsiders or because they owned property that someone else wanted. In conclusion, the story of witch trials is a complex one, full of myths and realities. While it's true that many alleged witches were nothing more than victims of superstition and fear, it's also true that witch trials were a real phenomenon that occurred throughout history. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the dark world of witch trials. If you have any thoughts or opinions on the topic, be sure to leave them in the comments below and follow me for more such content.